Wow, Wade, it is so great to see you. I'm so excited for this webinar. I know that we have an amazing community who couldn't wait to be here today. And so I'm going to let everyone kind of trickle in here as we get started here.
That sounds good. And
Yeah.
I may not sound suddenly, my main microphone disappeared from the options. That's not great. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm
Yes,
now
yes, we can.
using an inferior microphone.
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So we've got everybody is coming in here now. So welcome everybody. We're just kind of waiting for everybody to get in here. I'd love to know where everybody is watching from today. Wade and I we're in different locations right now. I'm in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and Wade, you are in?
In Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
Oh, and there's my microphone. We're good now.
Okay, love Dallas. Love Dallas. Okay. And just getting a couple more settings. Thank you all so much.
Looks like someone down the road from you, Tina, in Berwyn.
That's great. We've got Knoxville. We've got Pasadena, Hilton Head, Devon, PA. The funny thing
Yeah,
is,
the
Wade,
main line is well represented.
yep, and we've got Berwyn. Awesome, Stephanie from Berwyn. So Wade, you'll be really happy to know that the decision to move to Pennsylvania 2 years ago was done with retirement planning in mind.
Okay.
and and taxes. I feel so proud to tell you that today. Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
compared to some neighboring states, there's definitely a nicer state income tax system in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, for sure. I was coming from New Jersey.
Oh yeah.
And most of the people in my development are either from like a Taxachusetts kind of a state. So this is really exciting. Hello, Las Vegas. Great. And Keswick, Virginia. Fantastic. Yes, Stephanie has clients who did the opposite and retired to New Jersey. Ouch. I love that. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, we're going to get started. It is 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you all for being here. Big shout out to Colorado. Howdy to Raleigh, San Diego. We're so happy that you joined us. Thank you very much for participating. So good afternoon and welcome to Intentionally and Friends Book Club, coming to you live from Intentionally Studios here in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, with our special guest, Dr. Wade Pfau, author of Retirement Planning Guidebook, Navigating the Important Decisions for Retirement Success, second edition, available on Amazon and all major book outlets. Before I introduce Wade, let me start with a few housekeeping announcements and just some introductions. If you don't know me, my name is Tina Powell. I'm partner, chief growth officer here at Intentionally, and I'm joined by my partner, Intentionally co-founder and president, Megan Richter. She's here, and our colleague, Melanie Herrera Bridges. The biggest shout out for our CEO and Intentionally co-founder, Kelly Waltrick, who conceived of this Intentionally and Friends book club, this amazing idea, and let us run with it. You can visit our website at intention.ly to subscribe and get the latest updates on all our upcoming meetings and guests. And if you're having any technical issues, questions, comments, please send the message in the chat and we'll do our best to get to it as soon as possible. This book meeting is being recorded. Wade, that was the biggest question. Is this going to be recorded? Even if you are listening, anyone who's registered for the book club and for this webinar will get a copy of the recording. So great. And if you're an author or you would like to recommend an author, you can send it to us at bookclub@growintentionally.com. And lastly, for compliance reasons, we appreciate the courtesy of your time and attention today. Understand that the Intentionally Book Club is educational in nature, and we're not offering any financial advice specific to your own financial circumstances. So please consult with a registered financial professional. And with that, I cannot wait to introduce our first inaugural guest, Dr. Wade Pfau. Wade, how are you today?
I'm doing great, and I'm very honored to be the first inaugural guest of the book club. So thank you.
We're so excited that you're here. We have a strong listening audience and cohort in the financial advice community who couldn't wait to get today's broadcast. For those of you who don't know Wade, meet Dr. Wade Pfau. He's a PhD, CFA, an RICP, who's made it his mission to help financial advisors and people navigate the worlds of retirement income planning. He's the brains behind Retirement Researcher, a go-to educational resource, and co-founder of Retirement Income Style Awareness Profile, the RISA, along with Alex Murgia. On top of that, Wade co-hosts a podcast, the Retire with Style podcast, along with Alex. That's available on all podcast outlets, Apple, Spotify, and Google. And Wade's a pretty busy guy. He's not only principal, but he's also the director of research for McLean Asset Management. And he's got his hands in the Alliance for Lifetime Income and Retirement Income Institute as a research fellow, as a professor of practice at the American College of Financial Services. He's been able to share his expertise and even directed the Retirement Income Certified Professional Designation Program. A doctorate, wow, in economics from Princeton University. Wade has made a name for himself. You've published over 60 peer-reviewed research articles in various academic and practitioner journals. You've been a contributor, Wade, to Forbes, Advisor Perspectives. Oh, and you're also an expert panelist for the Wall Street Journal. Your latest book, Retirement Planning Guidebook, Navigating the Important Decisions for Retirement Success, now just released in its second edition. It's the focus of today's book club. It is a must read and a resource. I don't know if you all saw my social media posts. If you're a financial advisor, this is a fantastic resource, not to have for your own internal team, but for your clients as well. You can also check out Wade's 3 other books in the Retirement Researcher Guide series. Wade, that's quite an introduction. You worked very, very hard.
Well, thank you. No, thanks for the nice introduction.
Give you so much credit. Here's a fun fact, though. I'm going to start off with a poll. And so Wade, it was a lot of fun doing reading the book as much as I could. The 400 and I think it's 88 pages. I love the way it's broken up into chapters, but there are a couple of fun facts that we wanted to throw out there. So here it is. Wade, you grew up a big fan of which sport? So we're going to let a couple more questions, a couple more answers come in. Okay, we've got 27, 45, soccer, professional wrestling, rugby, and golf. Okay, so the top answer is professional wrestling. Is that right?
That's the correct answer.
Tell us a little bit about that. That's so interesting.
Well, as a child of the 80s, it's the era of Hulk Hogan, Randy Macho Man Savage, and so forth. I just really became enamored with it. And I also like baseball, but really it was, if I had to pick one sport, and people might say, well, it's not really a sport, but sports entertainment, it was always professional wrestling.
Fantastic. I like that. Who's the favorite sports team right now on baseball?
Oh, on baseball?
Yeah.
Well, as a kid, I was always into the Red Sox because Wade Boggs was on the team.
Yeah.
Now the Phillies. I did live in Philadelphia before moving to Texas, so I like the Phillies, and now with the Texas Rangers. But they haven't been too good since I've been living here. Although I think this year they're doing better. Yeah, although that shows how carefully I'm paying attention, I suppose.
Well, statistically, I guess that the ball that it can swing both ways, right? Like you can't be up all the time, right?
Right.
We
Yeah,
saw
and
that
that's
with the
something I do
Eagles
follow.
this year when making it to the Super
Oh
Bowl.
yeah.
It's fantastic.
And I did live in Philadelphia when they won their first Super Bowl, so that was really exciting.
That is exciting. Well, I think the main event, the main excitement here is the second edition of your book. Talk to us a little bit about the genesis of the second edition and who specifically the book is for.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first edition was published in September 2021, and a lot's changed since then in terms of just interest rates increasing. And every year there's just a new year of data to add to the analysis. But with the Secure Act 2.0 that was passed at the end of 2022, that required a lot of small and not super significant updates, but nonetheless, I had to read very carefully through the whole book to find every little instance where a tweak was needed for the Secure Act 2.0. But then also just as I do more research and things, there's always new content to be added. So adding in a lot of new material about tax planning, the impact of taxes on the 4% rule, the impact of higher interest rates on some of the other analyses, the role of the subsidies in the Affordable Care Act, and so forth. So that was really the genesis to want to have that second edition come out. And ideally, it would have came out right at the start of the year, but with Secure Act 2.0, it took more time to get everything updated.
So, and I imagine that that's the challenge of writing a book of this type, is that the laws are constantly changing. I would be remiss if I didn't ask if there was going to be a third edition in your future, Wade.
I think so. I've been, and in terms of who the book is for, financial professionals and also sophisticated consumers. It's not a beginner level book. So for someone who's never really read up at all on financial planning topics, they may feel a bit overwhelmed. But anyone with a basic financial education in place, consumers, financial professionals, and yeah, the books, I've been really happy with how the book sells and so forth. And so I do anticipate doing annual updates closer to the beginning of each year. I'll always wait until after January 1st so that I can have a true annual update with the numbers that come in at the end of the previous year. But that's the intention.
Yeah. Do you ever get any rest on vacation? Like, you must have to devote a lot of time to just research and keeping up.
Although I have been trying to streamline things so that in the future, I know exactly where everything that needs to be updated is, as long as there's not new laws like the Secure Act 2.0 that completely upend everything.
Yeah.
But for basic annual updates, I've got a nice streamlined system in place to do that now.
Sure. And I love our audience. We do want to encourage your participation, and we will get to your questions. Wade, our first question right now is, how updated is the RICP course? Is it still a video-based course? And that's the Retirement Income Planning course?
The Retirement Income Certified Professional Program.
Certified.
Yes, so I was the program director for that until the end of January, and then stepped down to focus more on the retirement income style awareness concept. But they do have a new director in place, Eric Ludwig. And I'm not up on the day-to-day involvement, but I'm sure that, and I know for a fact that they are updating the curriculum as well. So it's for the most part up to date at the present.
Fantastic. And this book is actually a series of 4 books. Can you explain how this fits into the rest of the knowledge base? And I want to tell everyone that you can get all of the books. The whole series is on Amazon. Wade has an author page there.
Yeah, so this is the 4th book in the series, but it's the book I was always trying to write. And it's really the starting point for, if you were to read just one book, this would be the one to get. The other books, just the reason they came out is as I was writing chapters for this book, some of those chapters got so long that they could be spun off as separate books. So I've also written a book on focusing more on the investment-based retirement income spending strategies, and that's how much can I spend in retirement. I've got Safety First Retirement Planning, which goes into greater depth about using insurance and annuities and so forth in retirement. And then I also have a book on reverse mortgages. And so all those books are summarized in the Retirement Planning Guidebook as well. And the role they can play if anyone just wants to take a deeper dive into any of those topics. Those books can be additional resources. But for most readers, the Retirement Planning Guidebook is probably sufficient. You really would want to be a completist to have all 4 books in the collection.
I'm going to pick up on a keyword that you just said, and that was safety first. And the way that you start out in your preface of the book is that you say most books on retirement income are written from one perspective of one income retirement style. Can you explain the underlying premise of income retirement style in simple and more advanced terms?
Sure. And this is something that goes back to the very beginnings of when I made the transition over into retirement planning. Before that, I was more of a traditional economist. And as I was reading up on retirement income, it's just there were these basic issues where you'd see vehement disagreements and almost like some people get angry about it, that there's different attitudes or viewpoints about the best way to approach retirement. And so you'll see some people say that everyone should be 100% stocks in retirement because they have this comfort with the idea that stocks will grow and outperform bonds and provide a higher standard of living than anything else. There are people that take the purely opposite approach to that and really think everything should be based more on fixed income and potentially with annuities and so forth. And so an important part of my research has been just identifying how these different approaches, they're all viable. I mean, to some extent, the math supports more the idea of building a protected income floor where you have lifetime income in lieu of some of the bond holdings, and then still keeping stocks for the upside growth potential, but not being completely dependent on stocks. But nonetheless, because these debates are so vehement, at the end of the day, I do think any of these different approaches are viable. And it's the total return investing approach. It's the time segmentation or bucketing approaches. It's the approaches traditionally called flooring, where you build a protected lifetime income floor with different types of annuities generally. They're all viable approaches, but how does somebody choose the approach that's right for them? And so the idea of the retirement income styles, and it's this work that I did with Alex Murguia, who has a PhD in psychology. And so it really blended the psychology and behavioral type side with the financial planning, retirement income side. Could we understand what sort of factors impact people's decisions about how they think about retirement income planning? And we uncovered 2 primary factors, 4 secondary factors that all together, it was really neat to see how these factors translate into the retirement strategies or styles that exist already, and how we can better understand who might feel most comfortable with which type of style based on these underlying preferences that they have. And that's what the retirement income styles is all about. It's a starting point, a first step in thinking about how do I want to approach building a retirement income strategy. And so it's chapter 1 of the Retirement Planning Guidebook, because I really do view it as, before getting too deep into any of the other topics, what's my retirement income style? And in relation to those other books I wrote as well, if my style is total return or time segmentation, and I really want to dig deeper into that, that's where the how much can I spend in retirement book is more relevant. If my style is income protection or risk wrap, then if I want to do that deeper dive, the Safety First Retirement Planning book covers those topics in greater depth. But that's really then the first step.
So I know we have a bunch of financial advisors, and again, we encourage you to put your questions in the chat here. I have a question, Wade, around that philosophy. So in determining the in working with financial advisors, having this book and working with their clients, are they helping their clients navigate and decide and to know which retirement income style they are? Or are they using this as approach of more of just helping to define, I guess, an overall asset allocation strategy for a client? Because you've incorporated a lot of different types of things. Your book is so comprehensive. You talk about annuities, you talk about the timing for Social Security, you talk about Medicare. There's so many components. How ideally, when it comes to retirement income style, how should advisors navigate that conversation with their clients?
Mhm. Well, what we're finding with that is there really are a large group of advisors who are looking for a community of kind of starting from this basic foundation that there are different ways to get it right with retirement income. So some advisors, again, they really just narrowly focus on one particular style, and they may think it's the best style that everyone should be using. The RISA, the retirement income style awareness, may never really resonate with that group. But there's a lot of advisors who feel a little bit left out in that they recognize it's really being able to integrate different tools, being comfortable with the investment side, being comfortable with the insurance side, figuring out when it's appropriate to emphasize each with different clients. That's the group of advisors who really will resonate best with the retirement income style awareness, because it provides a framework around helping identify for clients or prospects which of these styles resonates, so that the conversation can be more meaningful. So that if you're someone who likes talking about annuities with clients, you have a better sense of when those conversations will resonate, or when just it doesn't resonate with the style of that particular individual. They just don't have the characteristics that would lead them to look for the safety or the protections that an annuity provides. They're much more comfortable in the investment-based world of focusing on growth and accepting the idea of not having a predictable income, allowing for fluctuations in their spending, really valuing the optionality of investments. And so it can help guide those conversations in the right direction. And it's not purely a replacement for the asset allocation or the kind of traditional risk tolerance questionnaire, but really before you get to the phase of choosing an asset allocation, you really need to know what's the overall strategy going to be. If your total return, you do pretty much rely on investing for everything. But about what we estimate with these national studies that we've done, about 2/3 of the population may be looking for either contractual protections or commitments to a strategy that a pure total return investing approach doesn't provide. And that's where first, let's figure out how to then cover our core spending with a non-purely diversified investment portfolio-based approach. And once we have that in place, then we can return to the asset allocation decision. And when you have more protected income, you have risk capacity. So for your remaining assets, you might want to invest a little more aggressively, but you don't really know your asset allocation until you know your risk capacity. And you don't know that until you have a more of a structure around how you're going to build your retirement strategy.
That was a great answer. We have a couple of questions here. One from Ricky here. How does a goal to die with zero and having no legacy goals affect your retirement income style? Does it make you more total return?
So in that regard, if you don't have a legacy goal, and what we find though is that many people don't put a lot of emphasis on having a legacy goal. It's usually more a matter of, well, if something's left over, great, but I'm not really going to specifically work to help there be something left over. But if there's no legacy goal, usually the argument would be more in favor of it's okay to use something like an annuity, because the trade-off there is you can get a higher level of spending while you're alive. But if it's a lifetime commitment, an annuitized contract, there may not be any sort of death benefit associated with it. So you wouldn't necessarily be leaving something as legacy. The total return approach is generally favored by, well, there isn't our styles don't really, it's not correlated with a legacy goal. So I can't say if your total returns, you're more likely to care about legacy from that pure perspective. But generally, we think about total returns investing as a way to lay a foundation to have legacy as well.
Interesting that you had mentioned the word annuities, because Jean put it in her question. Can annuities keep up with inflation? If not, is a tips ladder better?
So annuities generally won't be the way to keep up with inflation. And they can be, and it's also important to emphasize it's not an all or nothing decision. It's So you want to put all your assets into a TIPS ladder. You wouldn't put all your assets into an annuity or anything else. Certainly, TIPS are the way to get inflation protection. So if you're emphasizing that strongly, TIPS are absolutely an important part of building a protected spending floor that would include inflation adjustments. The thing about annuities, though, is what I find is don't expect inflation growth to be funded through the annuity, but what it can do, even though it doesn't provide inflation adjustments, because it provides a higher payout than what is usually considered a safe spending rate from investments, it can, like if I put some of my money in an annuity, I can then use a lower spending rate from my other investments to meet my overall spending goal. And when I lower that spending rate from my other investments, that's an important way to help manage the risks, really, like sequence of returns risk, this risk of market volatility having a bigger impact. Because if the markets go down and I'm trying to fund a spending goal, I can dig a hole for my portfolio. Well, by having a lower distribution rate from my other investments early on, that can lay a foundation to make it easier for those investments to grow and to provide the inflation adjustments for my spending. So a strategy that incorporates annuities can be an effective way to help manage inflation risk in retirement, but it's not because the annuity is managing the inflation risk. It's because the annuity is making it easier for the other assets to provide the hedge for inflation or the growth needed to keep up with inflation.
A quick comment before our next two questions is that, yeah, the way that I was reading it in the book is that annuity strategy is a good strategy to make up that delta if somebody needed that kind of guaranteed income during a certain time in their life and wanted that kind of safety net there. Am I correct in that understanding? My simplified mind.
Yeah, I mean, the annuity makes it easier early on in retirement to cover your spending, which then makes it easier for your other investments to grow. And
okay. A quick question here. Are TIPS paying below the inflation rate?
Well, TIPS offer the real yield. So they're based on a real interest rate, and then they provide whatever the realized inflation is. So if inflation ends up being quite high, TIPS will give you a higher yield. If inflation ends up being low, TIPS would underperform, or at least low relative to what the market expectations have baked in. TIPS would underperform. But with TIPS, you're getting a real yield that's somewhere in the ballpark of 1.5%, right, currently, plus whatever inflation ends up being. So they do protect for inflation in that regard.
And I'm going to launch that next poll around the retirement income style. And while I'm doing that, I want to read a question from Michael. And that is that, can we describe some of the pros and cons of implementing each of the RISA styles? And so in our poll question right now, what retirement income style do you most relate to? I think this is going to be fascinating. We've got 4 questions here, so I'm wondering, do you have a guess what's going to be the top style, Wade?
Based on the kind of using LinkedIn to help promote the webinar and so forth, I'm going to have a hunch that total return will be most popular, but I don't have a great sense of the audience today, so I may be wrong, but I'll go with total return as my guess.
It's interesting. So there's like it's neck and neck. Time, segmentation, and total return are both at 30-31. Income protection, they're all at 31. Time, segmentation, total return, and income protection all the same. And then we've got risk wrap as the least. Do you want to just say a few words before we go on to our next topic about some of the pros and cons of each style? Again, I know that you've talked about it in the book. Michael's asking. Thank you for the question, Michael.
Well, the pros would be, one of the assumptions of any style is that the user of the strategy will stick with it through thick and thin. And so the pro of any of these is going to be if they help tell the story that the client's comfortable with, and so that they'll stick with the strategy, that makes it a big pro. And even if it's not somehow a mathematically better way to invest, it's going to work better for that client. Cons, it would just be using the wrong strategy with the wrong person. But I mean, at a simple level, the total return investing, if you're investing aggressively, usually the stock market will outperform the bond market, and that can be a source of a lot of growth in retirement. With time segmentation, it's not a better way to invest. It is more that behavioral story that if it resonates with the client, that I'll have these short-term buckets that will cover my spending needs for the next however many years. Then I don't have to worry about a stock market downturn because all my stocks are earmarked for these longer term expenses where there's time for the portfolio to grow before I need to tap into that. Then if that helps the client feel comfortable with their strategy, that would be the primary pro. And then with the income protection or the risk wrap, well, the pros are just simply replacing bonds with lifetime income protections can generally help support a stronger financial outcome for clients who are comfortable with that. And then you have the risk capacity to invest more aggressively with the difference. And so mathematically it can be a very strong type of retirement strategy. Income protection focuses more on the best downside protections. Risk wrap focuses more on seeking growth opportunities, but still having some sort of commitment wrapped around that. And so it becomes more of a behavioral type of strategy for implementing income protection as well. But in terms of, I mean, so if it's the right strategy for the person, it's generally the pros are, it'll give them a more comfortable, better, and not somehow mathematically inferior investing performance or overall performance in retirement.
Yeah, and Michael was also looking at, I guess, the question around implementation of each strategy. I don't know if there's an ease of implementation from one style to the other.
So the basic idea about implementation, and this is when we do this with like individuals with our retirement income challenges, these week-long opportunities to go through, find out your retirement income style awareness, and then run a basic financial plan. And then what we're looking at with the basic financial plan is there a gap where you don't have enough reliable income after accounting for Social Security and pensions to meet your core essential expenses in retirement? If there's no gap, then there's nothing to go further with, really. But if there's a gap, that's where the retirement income style comes into play. If you're a total return investor, you don't really care about that gap. You're comfortable using your diversified investment portfolio to fund those distributions. You're focused more on what's just a total reliable income plus my investments. And is that enough to cover my core spending and discretionary spending? But if you're one of the other styles, the implementation becomes, well, how do I fill that gap? If you're time segmentation, it's more of a structured like bond ladder type of an approach to having individual bonds maturing to cover those upcoming expenses. If you're income protection or risk wrap, it's generally looking more at filling that income gap with some sort of an annuity. And the type of annuity relates to the style, and just that if you're income protection, you're worried more about what could happen in the worst case scenarios. And that's where fixed annuities generally offer better support in the worst case scenarios. If you're risk wrap, you may be willing to accept less spending in the worst case scenario because there's more opportunity for a higher average spending. And that's where something like a variable annuity with a guaranteed lifetime income benefit or withdrawal benefit could potentially support a higher average amount of spending for that strategy to cover that income gap in retirement.
And I like in how you outline in the book, you have those expenses and different approaches to the same expenses at different parts of your life. There's another question that came in, and I swear, Wade, that you have this incredible prescient quality today, in that a lot of the words that you're talking about now find their way in the questions before you've even said them. And somewhere in the book, I read the fact that you're a big fan of using software tools to do calculations, and that there is a question about a software program that sets up a liability driven bond ladder that uses maturity of a bond plus interest flowing downstream.
Yes, there are. I'm not sure the wording. I don't see all the questions, but yeah, I'm aware of some software like that. Kind of sounded a bit like maybe that was a description of asset dedication. And there's other approaches out there as well that look at what's the most cost-effective way to implement a fixed income approach for the near-term expenses. And then if you're building the bond ladder, that's where I actually explain how to build a bond ladder in detail in how much can I spend in retirement, because I heard that nuance in the question of, yes, you have to start at the last maturity date, buy enough bond to meet that need. And then assuming we're talking about coupon bonds, then you consider, well, how much coupon income do I have coming in the year before? Then I have to fill the rest of that gap with a bond maturing at that date. Now I've got 2 bonds paying coupons. So I go to the next earlier rung of the ladder, and you have to reverse build out. And that would be the process for building out a bond ladder in reverse, from the furthest maturity to the closest maturity.
So we're getting a lot of questions. This could be like live Q&A with Wade. We're gonna get to those questions in just a minute here, but you brilliantly use the analogy of the mountain climbing to clarify the distinction between accumulation, what you call the working years, and distribution retirement. Can you share with the club that analogy?
Mm-hmm. Right. So this mountain climbing analogy really helps to explain the retirement problem, because if I ask you the question, like, what's the goal of mountain climbing? I don't know if you may know the answer to it, but a lot of times people might just say to get to the top of the mountain.
I would have said that, Wade.
But of course, in reality, you have to safely get back down the mountain as well. And with mountain climbing, most of the accidents happen on the way back down, not on the way to the top, but on the way back down from the top. And that's where there's a really close fit with retirement planning, where you might ask somebody saving for retirement, what's the goal of your retirement planning? And the natural answer might be to say some sort of wealth accumulation target. And there was even a financial services company that ran commercials where people walked around with numbers over their head. And it was like if I could save $1 million, then I can successfully retire. But that's just the equivalent of getting to the top of the mountain. You then have to sustain your lifestyle over an unknown time horizon, and in the face of new risks in retirement, where you don't have a salary as a backstop to help manage those risks. So it's a lot more dangerous climbing back down the mountain, making your way through retirement. And it's the goal of retirement planning, the goal of mountain climbing is not just to get to the top of the mountain.
I love that. And I think, and there was a reason that I wanted you to, we're getting some hearts and we're getting some thumbs up for that. The reason why I wanted to make sure that was something that you covered during this interview today on our book club, Intentionally and Friends book club, is because we know that there are a lot of financial advisors. This is going to feed directly into this next question, Wade. And I think that that's a great analogy to start the conversation about retirement income planning, retirement income styles. So here's Manuel's question. How do we change the dialogue around FIAs, fixed index annuities, in the financial advisor and AUM assets under management space? It seems like providing safe and guaranteed lifetime income through annuities is frowned upon in the managed money sector.
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely a problem. There are definitely many investment managers who won't even consider the idea of an annuity. And that's when I was talking before around retirement styles. That would be these investment managers, their total return, and they believe that's the better approach. And that's what everyone should be using. Whereas we find that approach really only resonates with about 1/3 of the population. So there's definitely a discrepancy there. But no, the work that I've done, what really, when you consider, especially on a net of tax basis, because deferred annuities provide tax deferral as well. But a fixed index annuity, it's really competitive with anything that bonds can do. And it's not a replacement for stocks. And sometimes the marketing around them is off. They'll talk about like get stock returns without any of the risk of stocks. And that's not at all the idea. You're not going to get as large of upside growth opportunity as with the stock market, but you can get a better overall performance than bonds. And that's the role they can play. Like if I have principal protection, I wasn't exposed to the double-digit losses that bond markets tended to experience in 2022 and so forth. right now, a fixed index annuity might be somewhere, it's linked to a stock index and price returns, 0% floor, you're never going to get less than zero, maybe a 10 to 12% cap. You're never going to, if the market's up 30%, you'll be capped at 10 to 12%. But that's not your bond. I mean, that's not your stocks, that's your bonds. And so you're getting an annual annual return somewhere between 0 and 12. And on average, that could be higher than bonds with less volatility than bonds. And so if you're looking at like a modern portfolio theory, how should I choose my asset allocation? These types of structured annuities, like fixed index annuities, can provide higher returns and less volatility, especially net of taxes. So they deserve a role on that efficient frontier. And even an investment manager who's not even thinking about the income protections for lifetime income, just on a pure asset allocation basis, there's a lot of movement to talking about structured annuities as asset classes in the portfolio. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting opportunities there to improve outcomes for clients with such tools. And because historically such tools were commission-based for advisors who are fee-only, that's been a struggle, but it's no longer a struggle. There's plenty of opportunities now to work with fee-only annuities, don't pay commissions, that can be incorporated and managed in the same manner as any other investment assets that the advisor is managing.
I'm in awe. I'm in awe of just your knowledge. Clearly, you were born. You have such a God-given mind here and intellect around all things retirement income planning. And your book, again, I want to remind everybody, the book is Retirement Planning Guidebook, Navigating Important Decisions for Retirement Success. Second edition. At the time of writing my notes, Wade, 564 global ratings. And one of your reviewers, and this is going to lead into a next question about healthcare expenses and something I can relate to, Craig Nooch Tatirlin on February 27th said this: I'm a few months away from retirement and found this book from a Wall Street Journal article, possibly written by the person who posed the question, David Conte. I have read it from cover to cover, and it is far the best advice I've seen anywhere. Wade Pfau has done the analysis and the research and provides a logical approach to every financial decision you will need to make before and in retirement. He's even nailed the non-financial things that you need to think about retirement. I was so impressed with this book that I bought another bought another one of your books, and that goes into even more detail on the retirement distribution approaches. So before we talk about what some of those non-financial things are, one of the financial things are around healthcare expenses. There's a question around healthcare expenses as a variable and expense. Healthcare expenses are a variable expense and can be one of the largest you have to plan for in retirement. How do you factor in healthcare cost in your models? And that comes to us from David Conte. Thank you, David, for the question.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple different aspects to that. And also once people get to Medicare, that can help simplify the many possible permutations of all this. But that's at age 65. So for anyone retiring before 65, you may have two different answers based on what are you going to do until Medicare kicks in, and then what do you do after Medicare? And with Medicare, now if you get a comprehensive Medicare supplement, you're helping to limit some of those potential out-of-pocket costs, not with the prescription drugs, but with all the other health expenses. And now as part of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, and so this is another thing addressed in the new edition, over the next several years, some of the tail risk on how high prescription drug costs can go is starting to be reduced because they're phasing out like the catastrophic phase and capping. And I think it's in 2025 where prescription drug expenses are going to be capped for Medicare recipients as well.
Wow.
It suddenly becomes a lot easier to plan healthcare expenses other than something not covered by Medicare or other just out-of-pocket type expenses. But the way I describe trying to manage this, and this is where it gets complicated pre-Medicare, because it also depends on how much is your current health insurance subsidizing some of these costs for you to estimate what those costs would be. But getting a sense of how much have you been spending on healthcare, and just trying to make adjustments to extrapolate from there, possibly even looking at the statements about benefits to see what would the cost have been without insurance, how much did the insurance subsidized, how much might I be facing if I didn't have that insurance, and building in some buffers of, okay, let me add in a couple extra $1,000, however much I need to feel comfortable that if I had to have additional healthcare expenditures beyond what I budgeted for, it wouldn't break my budget. I have some reserve assets set aside for healthcare spending shocks, but then just doing the best I can to estimate what are my Medicare premiums going to be, how much might I pay for a Medicare supplement, or if I do go with Medicare Advantage as an alternative, estimating costs around that, estimating the costs around the prescription drug coverage, and building in an additional buffer for expenses I might not have accounted for as well. And there's also some of the big companies like Fidelity always puts out their estimates for retiree health expenses. And if what I just described sounds like too much effort, as a starting point, you could use something like that, where for 65-year-old couples, they're estimated at around $325,000 from age 65 and beyond. And for individuals, then women usually get higher estimated health expenses than men, depending on the study, but usually because they live longer. So there'll be more years of spending, but it's somewhere in the ballpark of the like $160,000, $170,000 over the lifetime from age 65 for as an average kind of health expense to plan for.
I think there's a common theme, and that is addressing that gap. There is a question from Neil: are there generalized metrics of how many people have enough income where they don't have a gap?
On the income gap of,
Yeah, are there any generalized metrics of how many people have enough income where they don't have enough gap? Like, I guess, what's the percentage of Americans that are okay and have a fantastic retirement income plan? That's
and
kind of the people who have managed to do it successfully. I don't know. Are there any metrics out there for that? It's an interesting question.
There's different studies that generally point to this idea that there's a significant shortfall, that Americans are not saving enough for retirement. And so there may be, using that, estimates made that people are not going to be able to spend as much when they're no longer earning a salary because they just don't have enough resources saved to cover that. And with the income gap, I think some of that can be overstated, because at the end of the day, most Americans will have a Social Security benefit, and that's an important source of reliable income that's inflation adjusted. And that may not truly be enough to cover their estimates of expenses, but people can adapt. But I guess just more generally, the general estimate would be there's going to be like the majority of Americans would not have enough reliable income to cover their basic expenses in retirement. Now, whether or not they can adapt, I am a little more optimistic that people can adapt, and some of those like scare type metrics are a bit overstated.
So when we were on the subject of Medicare, I wanted to launch this poll, so I'm going to launch it right now. Medicare open enrollment. What period is Medicare open enrollment? We have such a smart audience, Wade.
That's great.
It is every single, see, I would have answered the question wrong before I read the book. I did like the chapter on Medicare and you going and delineating the Medicare A, B, C, D. So that was really helpful again. And I think like that's the fantastic, that's where the utility of the book comes in. Again, having the conversation for people like me who are more of the end client and not the financial advisor. I did also to relate to something that there were a lot of aha moments for me. One of them, the characteristics of by the way, you're all really super, super smart. The Medicare open enrollment period is October 15th to December 7th. So great, fantastic. I'll share the results. We've got we've got such a smart audience. So here was this was another aha moment for me. Characteristics of a good place to live in retirement. I would love for you to explain. That's Joseph Coughlin, the director of MIT Age Lab. The way that, see, I love these just principles, and I think that they're perfect segues. I think they're perfect conversation starters. Can you talk a little bit about those 3 basic questions from Joseph Coughlin? Thought
Mhm.
they're fantastic that you mentioned them in the book, something I could easily relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of retirement planning is just, starting to think ahead about if I really want to stay where I'm living and age in place, is that going to be feasible? And so Joseph Coughlin, he asked 3 questions to just help people think about this. And the first one is, who will change my light bulbs? And so the idea there is just as people age and become less mobile, maybe, I mean, and it's yard work, things of that nature as well, that you're perhaps able to do on your own, but at some point, you may not be able to climb the ladder and change your light bulbs. Are you living somewhere where there's a social network in place where you can get assistance with those sorts of things? The another question he asks is, how will I get an ice cream cone if I want one? Like, and the idea there is to think about driving and mobility. And if I'm no longer able to drive, am I living in an area where I can still engage in these types of social opportunities of, yeah, I want an ice cream cone. Can I just go out and get one because that's what I like to do? Or will I start to get isolated? And also the third question he asks is, who will I have lunch with? And that's just thinking ahead of aging and lessened mobility and so forth. The concern is just people becoming isolated and maybe starting to get into negative behaviors related to watching too much television or surfing on the internet too much and really losing those social interactions. And so by thinking ahead, am I in a place where I can still meet with people and friends and have lunch with people and so forth? That being able to answer those questions, not necessarily today, but if I'm in the housing that I'd like to stay in, do I have a good answer for those questions, trying to think ahead about how things might change in 10 or 20 or however many years into the future as well.
And there's a comment here in the chat from Jeff that I think feeds really into this, Wade. And it's about, I guess, what I'll call like the American dream question. Is it really possible for a middle-class American married couple to spend $300,000 on healthcare alone in retirement over, say, 25 years and still be able to be retired? It seems like an impossible hurdle for most Americans. Thought?
It's well, it's definitely absolutely a challenge. And sometimes those kinds of big numbers can sound a lot scarier when they're presented as the big numbers. Like if you start to divide that out, and I think that question even mentioned 25 years. So you are then looking at a little over $10,000 a year, just as a simple kind of take the $300,000 divided by 25. And that may really not be all that far off of what people are paying for health insurance today. If you're that is for a couple, so that's then each person $5,000 to $6,000 a year on health expenses, that's not just out of pocket. That includes the Medicare premiums, and I think that estimate also assumes using a Medicare supplement as well as basic prescription drug coverage and out-of-pocket costs not related to what Medicare would cover. So it definitely sounds like a lot, and it's definitely a challenge. At the same time, though, it's not necessarily more than you're paying at the present unless you have very highly subsidized health insurance through your employer.
I found your book to be very prescriptive. And even without being a CFA or a PhD, you had talked, there was a great chapter on Social Security, and you had mentioned that even the decision of when to take Social Security could add as much as $100,000 to somebody's retirement. And I find that fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about some of the I guess best pieces of advice for Social Security and for that chapter? Anything new from like the Secure Act? Anything that our listening audience should know?
Mm-hmm. Right. And so Social Security, you have the opportunity to claim anywhere from age 62 through age 70. And in 1983, the current form of the Social Security system was enacted where there's delay credits. Well, there's penalties for claiming before your full retirement age, which is now working its way up to 67. And then there's also delay credits for waiting until 70. And in inflation-adjusted terms, you'll get 76 to 77% more benefits by waiting till 70 than compared to claiming at 62. So then it's just a matter of, well, you then have to live long enough to have those higher benefits work out to be more lifetime income. And usually, depending on your assumptions, it's going to be somewhere in your early 80s where that crossover point happens, where if I can live to my early 80s, I will have benefited from delaying Social Security to age 70. And then if I end up living into my 90s, that's where my decision to delay Social Security could add $100,000 or more of a lifetime income compared to having claimed earlier and gotten that permanently smaller benefit for the rest of your life. Now, with a couple, it's usually the high earner in the couple, the person in the couple who has the higher primary insurance amount from Social Security, when you look on your Social Security statement, who has the higher benefit listed. A stronger case can be made for that person to delay to 70 because that benefit's going to be available for the joint lifetime of that couple. If that person lives the longest, they're getting their own worker benefit. But if the worker passed away, then the spouse gets the survivor benefit, that benefit for the rest of their life. So it's a pretty strong opportunity with a couple that at least one person's going to live past the age where that individual would have been in their 80s, early 80s. And then, but the person with the smaller benefit, they have more flexibility around potentially claiming earlier and not necessarily waiting to 70 in every circumstance. But that's the idea there. It's certainly if I'm going to live into my 90s, there's a strong financial incentive to delay Social Security.
So we've got 7 minutes left, and we've got probably more questions than time allotted for you, Wade. I want to make sure that before we get to some of our last questions, number one is that I want to make sure that what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So my email address is wade@retirementresearcher.com. And that's also a website that was originally my blog. So retirement researcher, all one word, .com. And that's also the email address listed in the book. So happy to receive any messages through there.
Okay, great. Fantastic. And then Tony has a question. Chapter 12 has some great information on the non-financial aspects of retirement success. Does RISA help address these non-financial aspects in some way?
The non-financial aspects are really important. It's not something that the RISA was intended to address, because the RISA purely is about as a starting point for developing the financial strategy for retirement. How do I want to do that? But with the non-financial aspects of retirement, in a way, they're as important, if not more important, than the financial aspects, because people need to have some sort of plan. And the way I summarize this is, you want to be able to retire to something, not retire from something. Like if you're retiring because you hate your job, but you don't really have any other plans lined up for what you're going to do, that can be problematic. Work does a lot of things for people besides just a source of income. It's a social environment, it's structure, 8 hours every day, you know what you're going to be doing. It's just an opportunity to feel like you're a valued member of society and so forth. And so on the non-financial side, not everyone, but a significant number of people struggle with kind of feelings related to, what do I do now? My life was work and my identity was my job. I was either a lawyer or an accountant, and I don't have that anymore. Now I'm a retired person. And that can create a lot of negative feelings for people. And so trying to find a replacement for work that gives you meaning and purpose and passion is really important. And it's really important to start addressing that before retirement, because I think it's also easy for people to say, oh, I don't have time to call my friends now or to engage in my hobbies now, but I'm going to wait till I'm retired, then I'll have plenty of time to do that. But if you neglect those types of things, or if it's a hobby that you've been saying for the past 20 years, well, when I retire, I'm going to do that, it's quite possible that you're not really planning to do that, or it's not really as important as you might have thought, or else you would have found time during those 20 years previously as well. And then you won't have that excuse anymore. And then that can lead to negative feelings and so forth. And so the non-financial aspects is really about addressing purpose and passion for retirement before actually making the transition into retirement. And it is a separate topic from the retirement income style awareness.
But you've covered in the book, Wade.
It is in the book.
Yes, exactly. That's why this retirement income planning guidebook is your Bible to retirement income planning. There is a question around Social Security. It actually popped up in my mind too, and I neglected to ask it. Neil, thank you very much. How are you thinking about the Social Security Trust Fund depletion estimates, and how should clients plan for reduced benefit? I love that question.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we just had the new trustees report come out in the last couple of weeks, and they've moved the date a year sooner. I think it's now 2034 is when the joint Social Security and Medicare trust funds are expected to be depleted. So with my own personal planning, I assume just my legislated benefits that I'm entitled to will be 25% less, as just a way to try to build in a conservative assumption there. Some people want to plan that they're not going to get any Social Security. I think that's really overdoing it. I think at the end, when it may not happen until 2031 or 2032, or when we're right up at the deadline, but eventually some sort of action will be taken. And if it follows historical action, it'll be some sort of combination of tax increases and benefit cuts, but also benefit cuts that don't necessarily impact current retirees. It's more that will impact future retirees. If you think back, 1983 was the last major reform, and they increased the retirement age by 2 years. But that people who are 23 years old in 1983 are the first to have that age 67 full retirement age. So it's usually gradually implemented benefit cuts, like an increased retirement age, which works as a benefit cut. So I think I'm probably in a way overdoing it by assuming a 25% benefit cut for myself, but I certainly wouldn't begrudge anyone for doing that. And I am further away from retirement than people who maybe that's on their short-term horizon at this point. But if you wanted to assume a 10 or 20% benefit cut, that's reasonable as well. The other thing to note, though, is a Social Security statement assumes 0% inflation and 0% wage growth, which the issue there is historically wages have always grown faster than prices. And that leads to a growth in the benefit in a manner that won't be reflected on your Social Security statement. So what you might find if you're still, like, say, 50 years old, the growth in your benefit not shown on the Social Security statement, because it's assuming no wage growth, will more than offset any sort of subsequent benefit cut. So the benefit you see on your statement might end up being correct when you offset a benefit cut with the projected growth in benefits that's not shown on your statement.
Great. Thank you for that answer. So we've got 1 more minute left. A note to our attendees, we are giving away a $100 Amazon gift card and a copy of Wade's book. And what we're doing is we're throwing all of the questions and the people in the chat, and we're going to put it in a randomizer, and we're going to have it selected. So we really appreciate, there's been so many questions. And again, I apologize that we couldn't get to all, but Wade has been so generous with his contact information. So please, if there wasn't something that we covered on today's book club meeting, you can deal directly with Wade. Wade Pfau, congratulations on Retirement Planning Guidebook. Again, what an incredible body of work. I'm in awe, and we are so grateful that you joined us for today's Intentionally and Friends book club. Many blessings to you and Alex, everyone at RISA, and I'm in awe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks everyone for all the great questions today and participation.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month. And again, just to remind everybody, if you have registered for the Intentionally and Friends book club, this specific meeting with Dr. Wade Pfau, you will receive a copy of the recording. We appreciate the support so much. Thank you for all. Wade, we're getting thumbs up, applause, and just thanks for you to be here. We certainly learned a lot from you. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Wade.